IVM.
Welcome to Think Fast. What are we? We are a podcast. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about startups, we talk about brands, we talk about technology, business, marketing, and also random creator stuff, which I throw at Suchita when she's like, dude, where do you find all these people? And then she throws stats at me where I'm like, I feel really stupid when I hear those stats. But welcome to Think Fast. We try to think fast. We say random shit, but we also speak a lot of sense if you want to know about what's happening in business, tech, marketing, and the creator economy. Yes, that's my line.
Congratulations on yet another long intro, Varun.
Yes.
What's been up, man? What has happened this week? What's been on your radar?
I've been putting up fitness videos. I think my midlife crisis is going further, but that's not what you asked me about. But I have been obsessed with Vicky Katrina wedding. It's been my focus entirely. And
you weren't invited, Varun. Not influential enough, I see.
I was not invited. Although he was my neighbor. Weird fact. Vicky Kaushal was my neighbor for a good 6 to 9 months in the last building I lived in.
Still didn't invite you for his wedding. Varun, your fitness videos aren't doing it no more.
I have met him at the building gym.
Oh my God, congratulations.
But what have you been looking at?
Oh man, so much. Crofers rebranded yet again, not yet again, that's an exaggeration, but like they've pivoted like a bunch of times with respect to their business model, and $800 million they have rebranded to Blinkit. And I don't know about you, but I have seen their like hoardings all across Delhi. They've been like mass advertising a hell of a lot.
Wasn't Crofers a nice name? I thought it had a lot of recall. Why would they change that name?
I think it's like a big positioning. Their positioning's totally changed. So their positioning's gone from, they started out as like a big basket-ish platform. Then they went into private label. I think they did 2-3 other things in the middle. And now basically they've entered the quick commerce segment. So I think this is like your,
favorite
blank
segment.
Canvas. Yes, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Let's move forward.
Yes.
But that happened. Good Glam acquired yet another publication. Miss Malini falls within the Good Glam universe umbrella. We're going to be talking about that in just a bit. And
can we start calling it the Good Glam cinematic universe? Like an MCU type, there's a Good Glam universe now happening, considering the number of brands that are now a part of it.
Yeah, but I have a lot to say about this. I'm just going to try finding like the world's most politically correct way to say the things that I want to say. We'll get into that a little later. Yes. And by the way, India represent at Chanel.
Yes.
Sadly, none of us are getting free Chanel bags, despite an Indian taking the helm of, one of my favorite luxury brands.
Can I also give you a random fact?
Yes.
The most expensive perfume I ever bought for myself was Chanel. When you're randomly at an airport and you don't know what to do and you don't realize conversion rates and you end up buying one tiny bottle of perfume and you realize how much you paid for it. So you use it very, very sparingly. I have a Chanel for Men bottle.
Was this on your trip to the Maldives? The third trip to the Maldives?
I have no idea. It's been with me for a long time now. I should check if it's expired because some of these things, once the conversion happened, I'm going to use this like precious water.
Oh my God.
I think I'm in a random fact mode today, but I will make sure that I don't push that ahead. So what we will do is that I will not say randomness anymore and we'll go in for our first break and we'll right back with a lot more relevant pieces for our audience. Yes, guys, I'll get my head back on straight and we'll be right back with Think Fast.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Think Fast. Yes, my head is back on straight. I'm not talking randomness anymore. And we're going to get into the Think Fast segment. For those of you who have not heard our past episode, in the Think Fast segment, we ask each other one-line questions, which generally becomes multiple sentences for me. And we try to get think fast thoughts from each of us, if that's the term to be used, or like fast thoughts from each of us. So we're going to kick off by, Sujita, why don't you ask me the first one? And then I'll ask you the next one.
Done. This week in fundraisers, Third Wave Coffee Roasters 6 million Series A.
Okay, so here's my thought on Third Wave. If every single VC, every single startup in Bangalore is sitting in a Third Wave coffee roaster and having their coffee, having their meetings and raising funds and doing deals, at some point of time, someone would have said, okay, guys, what are you up to? And that's how they raise money. I don't think there's any other way, because I've heard the coffee is decent. I've not heard too much about anything else in the product. I just think you're in a great place, and you are pretty much the place where every single person with funding is sitting. That's my perspective. What's yours?
So I think Third Wave's definitely got a cult around them. Again, I was actually in Bangalore 2 days ago, and I was working out of Third Wave in their HSR layout, sort of branch thingamajig. Again, lots of like cacophony of startuppers. You see your like coders, and I think I saw a bunch of VCs in the mix and founders in the mix and this, that, and the other. So they've definitely got this like cult or aura of all things startups. Unfortunately, there are very few people who've come close to Starbucks's service levels, and I think that's what's lacking across the board. But good on them, man. I mean, I think their sources of capital, you're totally right. I think a lot of their money came from angels, no VC as such. Apparently, by the way, sorry for stretching this section out, but Lee Fixel, as per Manish Singh on Twitter, who, if I'm not mistaken, works for TechCrunch, he apparently made an investment in this. Lee Fixel of Tiger has made an investment in Third Roast, which is a pretty big deal. But I'm going to shut up. You have a question for me.
That must have been some good coffee. Some great double espresso has gone there. Okay, my question to you. Ola Electric, first batch is out. Ashish Mishra had some things to say on Twitter. There's an article out there as well. I will not dig further into that. And but it's supposedly not fully done. It's like a beta mode rather. I like to call it beta mode. But anyway, what's your thought on that?
I think it's like a month late in terms of its,
Which is not bad considering you see how long Tesla takes to give things. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think, the speed at which they've been able to make things happen is insane. I saw a couple of tweets from Bhavish on Twitter, of course, where he sort of, showed this picture of what that piece of land was back in Jan of 2021. And obviously, they've really like supercharged this despite the second wave, coming in the middle of all of this. I know people have their opinion on Bhavish and, Ola and will these bikes work? Will they not? But go EV. That's all I'll say over here. There's I think there's so much room for like growth and development, and I hope they've got their tests in place, because I know that was one big criticism for their first sort of release. But switching gears to the Bhavish of the US, I suppose.
I don't think you want to call him the Bhavish of the US.
Okay, sorry, guys. Okay,
you'll have an avalanche of.
This is how we will get listeners. This is how controversy. So Elon Musk is not the Bhavish of the US by any barometer. Elon is Elon. But my question, before you distract me, Elon Musk is Time Magazine's Person of the Year. What do you make of that?
I'm 50-50 on this one. I still feel that considering we've been through the COVID piece, now we're still focused on people around, let's say, vaccines and first responders, etc. But, well, he's had an interesting year. I don't think he has stopped being in the news. He has continued to innovate, and let's admit it, biggest innovator of our times. I actually find the Boring Company to be the most interesting thing that he's doing. I find that to be super exciting in terms of what he's doing there. Always excited about Mars. But yeah, I mean, he's an easy choice, but is he the best choice? I don't know. I think there could have been better choices there, just from like the environment we're all in the world. What do you think?
I don't know. I think Elon Musk is the reactions to him are so extreme. You know what I mean? He's like, what's the closest like food, equivalent? You know what I mean? Like you have like very like extreme reactions to like his personality. And I think
he's like aloo in biryani.
Yeah, like a vegetarian biryani, right? Like,
that's what vegetarian biryani is a terrible thing. Let's be honest. That's just pulao. That's not biryani. But anyway, that's a longer conversation.
So keeping the food, whatever examples or analogies aside, I think with him, there's so much to be inspired by for obvious reasons. Everything that he's doing with SpaceX, he was way ahead of, EV. I mean, he's a maverick, that there's no sort of mincing words around that. I do think some of his Twitter choices have been pretty controversial and unnecessary. You'd imagine someone who's like that intelligent and that capable to be spending his time on more interesting things. I mean, it is what it is. Good job, Time Magazine. Good job.
Yes. So my next question to you is, there was this People's Choice Award and Dwayne Johnson won the People's Champion Award. I'm a Dwayne Johnson fanboy. I know that you like Dwayne Johnson too. What's your thought on this?
I just want to
Do you like Dwayne Johnson? Or am I assuming that you do?
You are assuming I like Dwayne Johnson. I have no shits to give about Dwayne Johnson. The only like Hollywood actor who I really care about is Ryan Reynolds. So up until Ryan Reynolds doesn't win shit. Yeah. But apparently Bezos gave him his choice or
Yes.
whatever
Yeah.
People's
The
Champion
tequila
Award.
buddies, supposedly. That's what he said on stage. My tequila buddies given me this award, and it was like quite funny to see them both. It was like watching
Bonding over tequila.
Black Adam and Lex Luthor together on stage.
What is Black Adam and Lex Luthor?
Oh man, so much to talk to you about. You did, I have a lot of stuff to tell you about DC and
Schooled with Varun.
Yes. We need to do an entire deep dive into this. But before I digress further, and
I have
since
a
you have
question
no
for
shits
you.
to give about Dwayne Johnson, you can ask me my next question.
Yes. MapMy India's pretty cool IPO. The issue was subscribed 154 times with retail investors bidding for 15.20 times the reserve shares. For those who don't know, MapMy India is leading provider of advanced digital maps, geospatial software, etc., etc., etc. What do you think, man? Really has come out of like there've been some really pleasant surprises in this IPO, shtick of the past couple of months.
No, MapMy India is one of those companies that we don't give enough credit to because they've actually done something fabulous, right? If you look at it, we always talk about the stuff that's come from Silicon Valley or what's come out of, what is considered the tech base, this one. But MapMy India is in many ways like a pioneer, right? What they've been able to do in India, and I know that from a larger scale, companies do rely on them. So I'm happy at some point it's not just IPOs aren't just relying on buzz, but it's actually like strong fundamentals, strong business, strong product. So they kind of tick all the boxes there. So I definitely think that's like, it's a no-brainer that it did well, but I'm happy that it was a non-buzzy company, but had a lot of solid stuff there. So that's why I'm guessing that's why it did well. So it shows that there is some logic going in here.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree. And I think, there are a couple of others. There's this really interesting company based out of Chennai whose name I am forgetting, but I will hopefully remember by the end of this podcast. There's also RateGain that just announced that just IPO'd. I got a quick WhatsApp alert. A lot of really interesting companies, I think, especially within like the B2B segment, which, obviously doesn't get enough real estate because of the nature of B2B. Yeah. It's interesting to see a lot of these bets, play on the stock market, specifically in the Indian context. So good on you, MapMy India.
Yeah, for sure. And in the final question, which is generally me finding some random creator who you have never heard about and ask you a question about, I'll give like a quick 30-second context. Matt D'Avella is a creator who has shot all the minimalism documentaries you would find on Netflix. He started on YouTube many years ago. Everything from productivity to minimalism to many other things is a lot of fun. It's like also he's one of those slow creators whose content is not super hyper. It's very like calm. And he has been on Patreon for a long time. He's funded himself using Patreon for a while now. But what he's actually announced recently is that he finds the need to have subscription where he's giving people some content for subscribers every month to be tiring as a creator. And he's moving towards a product system where he has a website called slowgrowth.com, does a bunch of courses there, which he's kind of built out. So he's saying, I want to focus on that and not have to do this monthly exclusive content because he felt that actually became more of a load on him than the actual content creation was. So it's an interesting shift where we all thought people were also going to start doing a lot more of this monthly subscription piece. He's saying, no, I just want to go product in that sense. So what's your thought on that? Again, long question as always.
No, and super interesting example that you brought up over here because, I was listening to NAS Academy's Nussair, I'm forgetting his last name. Nussair, who you interviewed as a part of India Internet Day also. So I was listening to his podcast with Scott Galloway. Yeah. And it was really interesting because he basically said that, most of these platforms that are coming up, which are creator, quote unquote, monetization platforms, the biggest challenge with them is they aren't really guaranteeing distribution. So if I have if I were to create and if I had a Patreon account and I was, sharing exclusive information, with my followers, etc., I am still counting on my reach on my social media platforms to drive demand for me. And I think that's a challenge that, I feel Patreon will run into at some point where, so much of their like money churn comes from these top creators driving traffic, towards the platform. And honestly, if a creator had to choose in between one or the other, which is, use their distribution to actually harness into some tangible aspect of what the creator can actually do in the form of like a skill or, a course or whatever else, that evidently seems to be the direction in which a lot of these guys are going. I mean, even if you look at Nussair Yassin, he also launched NAS Academy with the same goal, right?
So platforms.
Exactly. So you use your content as a way to get eyeballs and then you really, percolate a part of those eyeballs into some amount of like, sellable product. In fact, I saw this really popular Instagram creator, Deepika Khosla. She just launched a beauty brand. I'll pull out the name and I'll share it with, all of us.
Even Bionic, right, which is Nikunj, he launched KRA. His product as well, and it's very interesting how he's launched it, where you need a passport to get into the site to be able to buy it. It's not open to all. You need to figure a way to get a password and stuff like that. So again, nice product as well. Everyone's moving to that. Creators are trying to build out product and see how it goes and do drops and everything else. So the need to do a Patreon model, I agree. It's going to be tricky for companies like that. The podcast you mentioned, people should listen to it. It's quite interesting. Nas and Prof G.
I think the thing that I really like about him is he's a really good speaker. He has this, even in the interview that he did with you, right?
Yeah.
Like really, really interesting way of articulating the way he thinks. So much energy. But in any case, let's switch gears into our short segment. We are breaking into is all things content commerce, which is Good Glam Group. That really is this like, messiah that's come out of nowhere, makes yet another acquisition in the content space. The Good Glam Group acquired Miss Malini. They call themselves now South Asia's largest content commerce group. I don't even know what the comparison is over here, but cool, I'll hand it over to them. Apparently the deal was cash and stock, and the assumption over here is Miss Malini will be able to work in tandem with Popexo, Scoop, Baby Chakra, which are other acquisitions made by the Good Glam Group, in really helping expand Good Glam's digital footprint and digital universe. And apparently Miss Malini has gone into some amount of influencer management, celebrity management, or it seems like that is one of their revenue streams. So that will get baked into the Good Glam universe as well. I have so much to say about this, but before I break into my 4-point spiel, Varun, what's your TLDR on one Good Glam seriously breaking out in the past year? I think it's incredible that they've gone from being obscure to basically grabbing the headlines every single month through their multiple acquisitions. And second, what does content commerce mean, and where do you think the strategy is coming from?
I'm looking at some of the recent acquisitions. I'm not getting into, let's say, a Baby Chakra, some of the others who have had a product piece. I think when I look at Scoop, and I look at Miss Malini particularly, because primarily content companies, in many ways, brands have tried to do a lot more editorial, try to build that whole content pipeline. Because I think marketing has become content in large. Like all content is marketing, and all. I think that thing goes either way. And as that's been built out and you need editorial teams internally, I feel this is a lot of him bringing talent on as well. Good Glam kind of bringing in talent, say, okay, can we build an entire, on one end editorial, and other end, because of all the products which they have, Miss Malini brings in long experience in really working with different kinds of talent. Also be like something which people tap into for Bollywood news, influencer news, everything else over there. So while the celebrity management platform is very new, I remember they launched it only a few months back. All the other stuff which she's actually been doing has been interesting. Malini's obviously been doing this for a while now, and also comes with a certain amount of just like, as a person comes with a certain amount of clout there. But talking about Good Glam specifically, I feel what they're kind of doing is, it's at which point does the beefing up end is my question. I know there's certain categories. I remember I was watching an interview. I forget the CEO's name for Good Glam.
Darpan Sanghvi.
Yes. And he was saying that one of the areas he wants to kind of focus on and build was, let's say, men's care, right? He hasn't focused on that men's category at all. He's gotten, he's kind of gotten all of it. So he's got content together. He says Scoop was his way to kind of get into that category because they have a large male audience in that sense. So he's going about it in different ways. But what I'm interested to see is how does this all come together? Because the most complicated part about acquisitions is to how do you make multiple brands stick under one umbrella, go with one thought process. That's always tricky. And how does he manage that with the pace he's moving at has been my question actually when I'm seeing this. But the editorial approach to how they market and how they put product out there, I think that makes total sense. But how does he bring it together is actually the larger question I have.
I think one is, how does he bring it together? And the second is, I mean, if you look at what most brands are doing, right? Let's start with Brass Tacks. Brass Tacks is that there isn't enough market depth in India for a single brand to, really generate the kind of, revenues that you need to justify $1 billion valuation and the likes. There's very few who've been able to do it. Not to say that it isn't possible. We're seeing Sugar make considerable headway. We saw Boat headphones make considerable headway in that general direction. I think the thing that is confusing me is, why buy publications and that too so many, when you can just buy brands that have enough of a cult around them, which they've been able to build through content. And I think the truth is there are a lot of really great brands, Dot & Key being a good example, right? Establish a super solid brand, on the internet. Obviously it was acquired by Nykaa right before their IPO, and that's my dog, not yours. But so Nykaa acquired Dot & Key right before their IPO. And I think the great thing about Dot & Key was they had just invested so well in their content, and through investments in their content, they were able to build themselves into a brand, right? You even see that with brands like Plum Goodness, which has built a beautiful community on Instagram. Again, a highly engaged community. And obviously their approach is fairly unique. You've got Juicy Chemistry and so many others, and really, really high quality product focused entrepreneurs that have found like a mix and a match in between obviously building great products, but marrying it with, really solid content and community building. I think the thing that confuses me is, to some extent, I kind of got the PopXO piece, because perhaps for MyGlam, they may not have had in-house capabilities of content and community building, and, having a team that knows how to do that really well, and leveraging that to, expand MyGlam's universe. That piece I kind of got. I don't fully understand why they would be buying so many publications instead of just buying brands that do a really good job of content and community, and plugging it into this ecosystem of distribution, which is what MyGlam seems to have figured out. That said, I think there's a lot of press that's been generated around MyGlam's multiple different acquisitions, specifically in the publication space or, the digital media space. But if you break it down into numbers, MyGlam has raised, as per Crunchbase, close to about $320 million. I am pretty sure not more than 10% of this investment has gone into the acquisitions that they've made, whether it's been in the form of, cash or cash plus stock, or however they would have structured the deal. And if that's how much has been allocated, that makes sense, because if you had to look at that pool of 320 million as your, quote unquote growth and marketing spend plus product development, 20 to 30 million would be about 10% of the overall amount of money raised, right? So spending 10% in brand marketing and using, all these publications as vehicles to help you build your brand, from a numbers perspective, I get that. So I think there is generally a lot of excitement around this content commerce. What is MyGlam doing? But the truth is, if you think about the absolute amount of money that's gone into this, it won't be a number as crazy as, how much they spent on Momsco, where I think they spent close to 500 crores acquiring that brand, if I'm not mistaken.
I also think this is more talent acquisition, to be honest. I feel it's more acquiring talent. I would say it's almost like and because the value would have been smaller, from even Scoop, for instance, was going through a tough time from a business standpoint, I'm sure, because everybody in that space has gone through a tough time in the last couple of years. Yeah. And I think it would have just been like, he would have got great value for the money he was paying. Gets a team on, gets enough buzz in there, and also gets reach immediately, right? He immediately has like enough platforms, enough channels. He doesn't have to build from scratch. So I'm guessing that would be the reasoning, but I still don't. My biggest question is still, how does he bring it all together? How does he make them all work together? And that's the biggest problem with most companies with M&A face. As a person who has been a part of an acquired agency for the last 4 years, I've seen that actually is the biggest struggle. It's just how do you make everything kind of work together is almost the constant focus. That becomes your primary focus as a leader. So, and then with the space at which he's growing, I don't know how he's going to do it, but it's interesting. I'll just keep looking at what is Gurglam's next acquisition. I think it's become everyone's lookout.
100%. Though I want to say, in the middle of all of this, so much respect for what MyGlam's been able to transform itself into. I mean, if you think literally in a year and a half, their trajectory has changed, right? Like they went from, not too much money raised to the kind of money that they've raised. They've got excellent investors backing them. And obviously it seems like they've got this super solid team together. Not to juxtapose, but I think it's really interesting to see how they are building their company up. And you have Sugar Cosmetics at the other end. And Sugar Cosmetics is like playing the slow, steady distribution first. I won't call them slow by any barometer, but like the steady distribution first kind of game, right? You're not really seeing them, acquire multiple other companies. I mean, maybe they're in conversation, who knows? But I think it's really interesting for like founders listening in to see that, both types of models can exist and both approaches can exist. And obviously, who is more successful, time will tell, but both can happily coexist.
So moving on to the next story, Fab India. Fab India's had a bit of a downslope just in terms of numbers. Their sales fell by third in FY21. Obviously, the pandemic has had effect on physical retail in many ways. But interestingly, this is the first time they've posted a loss and a sales decline in over 2 decades. So that's an interesting one to look at. Fab India obviously been around for a long time, almost like a go-to for anybody who wants to buy Indian ethnic wear in many ways. And this is around the time when they are considering, or rather, they filed their preliminary documents for their IPO. So what's your thoughts on this? I have many thoughts, but I'll get your perspective first.
I want to start by saying that, I've had the chance to interact with the Fab India team and William Bissell specifically, and what visionaries, right? I mean, they've obviously been at it for a while, and they've, got close to about
60 years.
Yeah, 60 years. Yes, correct. I think it's not just them. I think all of last year, all of retail was very, very badly affected. And you see this not just in their numbers, because I think the numbers we're talking about is their FY 20 to 21, numbers, 21 to 22 are yet to come out. Yeah. I think with them, I mean, so many opportunities that they could have tapped into, which perhaps they were a little slow to jump on. And the biggest one being category differentiation, right? If I were Fab India, I'd go balls to wall with home and kitchen. It's a category that's totally open. Fab India's home and kitchen is gorgeous, and it's amazing. super well priced. Cheaper than
and lasts really long. They're great quality. Correct. I can totally attest to that fact. Yeah.
Correct. Excellent quality. Their furniture is also great. And they've also, really, I think in the past year or two, revamped their designs. So their designs have also become slightly more, modern and with it. I think where their efforts went right, but perhaps COVID sort of rocked the boat for them. I know that they were, actively trying to capture a younger audience. And they did that by rejigging their design, rejigging their catalog. Like if you see their Western wear, it's actually quite cool. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen their, new men's
They also built out a lot of experience centers from what I've read. Just before COVID, that 1 year, I saw this spurt of Fab India experience centers, obviously larger spaces, more stuff there. Like you said, I'm gathering maybe furniture was a focus that was coming in. But I kind of felt that they've kind of missed the D2C bus, didn't they? They didn't really get into like selling online as much as they could have. And a lot of players, smaller players kind of got into it. Do you think that would also have been an effect on this?
So yes and no. I think they definitely miss the online bus significantly. I mean, they're the OG D2C, right? But they were D2C in the retail sense. So I think there are very few brands that have got the kind of retail footprint that, Fab India does. And I don't know if you've been to any of their experience centers, but they are like really, just Fab Cafe,
so nice.
Really, really nicely sort of done. So I don't know if for them it was, missing out on the direct consumer, sort of like equation. But I think definitely there was no like culmination of it as far as their digital universe is concerned. I think it was only last year when COVID really, rocked everyone's boat. Did they start thinking through, what their digital and online strategy needs to be? So maybe a little too late, but, they've been around for 60 years. I'm sure they have enough and more time ahead of them to get this right.
I also have a thought, right? Because I've been to a few, I think I've ventured out towards malls in recent times, let's say in the last few months, and I've realized that there is a lot of people out there going to shopping malls, going to, shopping centers. My question is, how many of them are buying stuff? Because the tendency now in many cases, I walk around, I experience all of this stuff, I come back home and I order it online. And that seems to be a way, because that's how I've behaved. I've seen a lot of people start behaving that way. Because I didn't see enough people leaving with shopping bags. Sometimes that creepy person in a mall checking how much people are actually buying versus just kind of walking around. And I call it tourists, right? You come to a mall as a tourist, you walk around, you tourist yourself around and you eat something in the food court and you leave. So my question here also is that at some point has consumer behavior kind of shifted a little bit more towards, fine, I am going to get more options online. I'll just go. This is more like a fun outing for me. It's not necessarily where I'm actually going to buy.
But it's not just that, no? Like if you think about it, what is the top selling segment or what are one of the top selling segments on Myntra for women? It's women's kurtis, which was like Fab India's niche, right? Like women's kurtis was Fab India's niche. If you open Myntra, you will find, the same block printed design at, $500, $400 during their sales, even extraordinarily more cheaper. So I think what ended up happening, I guess in their case, was their signature look, right? Which was that like Fab India block printed, Jaipur block printed kurta, or their, khadi kurtas. All of that just became available at much cheaper prices on, the Myntras, Flipkart Fashion, Amazon Fashions, etc. of the world. And if your design language doesn't, evolve to how your customer is consuming or where they're consuming, you're going to see a bit of a step back in terms of, consumption. So I think, more than online versus offline or any of that, it was just their offerings in fashion, I feel kind of like stagnated. And because the offerings stagnated and didn't just stagnate, there was a better, cheaper, faster alternative online.
Yeah.
That's why some of the battle would have been,
Because you always buy stuff in Fab India when there's a festival or there's a wedding, right? That's what you would do. You go to there. But I think now you, like you said, like you buy it in different places. You buy it online, buy it in Myntra, everywhere. Speaking of weddings, Vicky Katrina got married. So I think that is...
and dear listeners, Varun was
is,
not invited to remind him despite being Vicky's
I went to another wedding,
neighbor.
which I had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun.
Was it in Jaipur
going to a
or
wedding?
Ranthambore?
It was not in Jaipur. I went to Karjat. Okay, I went to Karjat and had a lot of fun with a bunch of old college friends and danced my way around, which is... my voice is recorded in time for this recording. But but it was news, right? It was totally content for everyone. I think everybody is looking at every single piece they could kind of get. Weddings are huge business in India. Why are we so obsessed with it again? I wonder why I'm obsessed with it.
It's education and weddings, right? It's those two categories that seem to be driving everything as far as consumption's concerned with respect to this country. And I don't know, there seems to be this that's a really good question. Why are we so obsessed with weddings? What was your wedding like? Was it this crazy, ostentatious?
My wedding was a mad party over 2 days. It was a lot of fun. I think that's the thing, right? Weddings and festivals in India are parties, officially allowed parties. Like people are out there dancing. You get to dress up really fun. You get to have. It's like you don't have it's our official rager, but is allowed by God. Is the way I look at it. And
of course, but I mean,
rager
for so many
allowed
people,
by God. God is the DJ.
Yeah, no, but oh God, Varun, again, you're back with your dad jokes.
So yeah,
I just want to say the winner of all things weddings is Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee. What a gangster.
Always.
Deepika Padukone, Katrina Kaif. Who was the other person who got married? I'm forgetting. There was one more who wore...
Anushka Sharma,
yes. So 3 massive...
Patralekha and Rajkumar also got married, correct? Thank you, Jalasmi. Our producer has told us. She has the information for us.
Our producer is cooler than us. She should be on Think Fast. I want to bring in our guest. We have another guest, guys, who are becoming very popular. We had Meeta Malhotra last week. And this week, we have none other than Mr. Sajid Pai, who's a director at Bloom VC. He is an absolute gangster, and we're going to bring him on the show right after this short break. So come back, guys, and listen to the Ben Evans of India, Mr. Sajid Pai. I don't know why I'm calling him Mr. Sajid Pai, but listen to Sajid as we shoot a couple of questions his way and get his 2 cents on everything that's happened this year in tech and startups.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Think Fast with Varun and me. And today we've got a very, very, very special guest to give us a roundup of all things that happened in VC in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Sajid Pai, as I like to call him, Ben Evans of India.
Round of
He's
applause.
literally... Round of applause. Varun, why aren't you clapping? Welcome to the show, Sajid. So good to have you on board. Thanks for taking our time to do this.
Hey, thank you, Suchita. Thank you, Varun. Yeah, you're very kind, but that's not entirely true. But yeah, but I'll take the compliment. Yeah.
So I want to jump right in. I know you're very passionate about EdTech, and obviously, Bloom in its portfolio and as a VC has been ahead of the curve as far as EdTech's concerned with your early bets in Unacademy and of course, Leverage EDU and the likes. So let's start with that. EdTech had a bumper year from consolidations to massive rounds, massive investments. What do you think is left to dominate here, and how can founders, who may be building businesses within EdTech think about the white spaces within EdTech at large?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good question. And EdTech's got a lot of attention, specifically with the mega rounds happening. Bloom operates at the seed stage, right? So we're about where founders are just getting started. They're like single-digit number of team members, etc. And there, Suchita, Varun, we're beginning to see not as much activity as you expect, right? So that's because EdTech today has become building in the shadow of giants. Unacademy, Baiju, Vedantu, ClassPlus, more, Upgrad, Eruditus, they were all raised shitloads of money. And what has happened is they're beginning to kind of enter into a lot of segments. They're kind of carving out space amongst themselves, right? Byju's, in fact, it's got this huge rapacious appetite for just eating everything, right? Even Great Learning, for example, $600 million deal, White Hat, $300 million deal. And so it's actually, I would say, become a little bit more challenging for younger companies to kind of build and scale today. And this is sort of an interesting challenge that's come. Exam prep, and fundamentally in EdTech in India, you can argue that a lot of it is exam prep and the other part is employability. These two, the big sectors, are almost closed out for young startups today. We're beginning to see a lot of activity still in some aspects, some areas of EdTech. Like I think, in fact, Radhika, my young colleague and who cover EdTech with me, we jokingly say that like 10% of all EdTech pitches are these like live classes for kids, right? Like online. And like I have this software called Alfred, which is basically you can do snippets, like exclamation C, and you'll get what you can replace. And I have an snippet for saying, hey, we get a lot of pitches like this. We don't believe in this space, etc., etc. So it's actually strange because exam prep and employability is so crowded. Everybody is kind of forced to do things which are classes for kids, for example. And so sort of interesting challenges in EdTech. But two areas I'm very I would say hopeful about. One is we're beginning to see some interesting learning technology. Some interesting startups with learning technology come in. The other one is I'm very hopeful about startups which are using India as a springboard to the West. For example, we met this company which does music education, and they're actually beginning to reach out to US citizens. Actually, they're based in Bombay. So some interesting green shoots. But overall, EdTech, I would say too much activity at the top end, at the late stage growth end, not enough exciting things as much as we expect happening at the seed end. Yeah, early stage end.
So at the seed end, what is happening? What are the really interesting new niches? I know you won't be able to disclose too much because hashtag deal flow and all of that. But what are the new spaces that are really exciting you and the team at Bloom, where you see major opportunities in the long run?
Is it only education, or should I
across the board?
Kind of cover it across the board? We're beginning to see, I would say, like, for example, in education, I talked about how there's a lot of focus on these kids kind of live classes. But that apart, if you look at, for example, I would say, we're beginning to see a lot more blue collar kind of because of Apna's success, etc. So there's a little bit of a copycat behavior in Indian startups. So you're saying because Apna has succeeded, we begin to get a lot of blue collar pitches. For example, trying to be either the next Apna or the next Team Lease, etc. Again, on the B2B side, we're beginning to see a lot of marketplaces, B2B markets, led by the success of Infra Market, Zetwork, etc. So each person is kind of saying we have cement market, then we have someone for steel market, someone for threads, etc. Systematically kind of working down. So SaaS is big. DevTools SaaS, B2B SaaS, huge. All right, like thanks to the success of the Postmans of the world, Innovators of the world, there are lots of SaaS plays coming out, and we're beginning to see Indian startups who today you can't argue that. I mean, they could be born anywhere. They could be Israeli startups, they could be US startups. So we're beginning to see very class. Then of course DTC. Great DTC action. Suchita, I don't need to kind of tell you anything, you know more than anyone, but we don't do much DTC, but we're getting a lot of DTC pitches as well. So these are some spaces. I should stop here. I'd love to kind of double click, zoom in onto stuff that you want me to highlight.
I'm going to double tap into DTC and dig a little deeper there. Because there's so much happening in that space, especially because of how people have been buying and how consumers are kind of evolved. How just like it's almost been this growth of so many brands and so many mega brands, and now this whole house of brands piece kind of also happening there. What are you seeing as opportunities for founders who now, let's say someone is trying to enter the space right now? I think that's an interesting. What do you kind of look at and say, okay, fine, it's already got a lot of players in it, but what do you kind of look at when you see someone kind of coming in and say, okay, this kind of is a company that can be something we should invest into?
Yeah, no, it's interesting you asked me that because for various reasons, Bloom's had very mixed success in DTC. I think we've tried a lot of brands and we've struggled with all of them, many of them. So we said, like, let's be a little cautious about DTC. But we began to be very pleasantly surprised by some of them. For example, whether it's Mama Earth, Boat, etc., scaling like humongously. So, but we've said that we will focus on a few areas there. One area we are excited about is DTC enablers, essentially someone selling picks and shovels. So we've done a thesis on it. A colleague, Diksha, and I kind of worked on this. So we're excited by spaces such as like warehousing solutions. And we have actually systematically divided it into the product side, distribution side. For example, discovery is one area where we find that there is a big startup waiting to happen. Instagram is just squeezing out the lifeblood out of young brands. And I think if startup can build discovery. Suchita, for example, I think led like LBB fundamentally does solve discovery problems for many young brands. But on the DTC side, I think there is something waiting to be built on the discovery side specifically. On the distribution side specifically, we begin to see very interesting plays. There were two startups which pitched almost around the same time, trying to build offline presence for online brands. And I really loved it. Very different.
Yeah.
Just give us and we'll plug it like Nestle, Unilever, etc. We'll get it into stores. So beginning to see very interesting kind of solutions on the enabler side emerge, which is less talked about. Everybody talks about the hot, exciting brands, ghee brands or underwear brands, etc. But not too many talk about enablers, the picks and shovels, and which I think is a very exciting space as well. Yeah.
I want to ask another, related but unrelated question. If you had to reflect on the past year and a half of not just like startups and tech, but consumers, right? What about consumers do you think has either fundamentally changed as a consequence of, tailwinds related to COVID? And what are the more interesting customer insights that you're seeing, come out of either the pitches that you listen to or even the companies that you've invested in? So what about consumers is fundamentally changing, or is nothing changing at all? People still like the same shit they did 10 years ago, and it's more about, creating more within existing spaces?
I mean, you could argue for both. One count is that I've seen kind of because of COVID, and I think this middle is kind of got shaken a little bit. Fundamentally, what I call India 1, or like the richer part of India.
Avocado India.
Yeah, avocado India, you call it.
Avocado India.
So this India is really become the engine for driving consumption, right? And if you've seen, for example, the rise of DTC is all fundamentally pointing to that. They are fundamentally saying, hey, we like using Netflix, we're using iPhones, we're having Starbucks, like give us other brands which look and feel like it, right? So one hypothesis we have is that richer Indians spend the lowest portion of their income on food, high quality food, right? The kind of food that we eat is not fundamentally different from how India 2 or something. I mean, yes and no, but begin to see proteins, for example, go up, like milk. Milk today, like most affluent Indians are spending like $100 to $120 on Pride of Cows or Bensar Farms or brands like that, right? They're more like Olesh, etc. Meat is beginning to, not exactly, but you're beginning to buy from Mauritius, etc. So proteins are leading the way, and I feel in the next 4 to 5 years that maybe a little bit longer, but the entire food, this thing will get reset. There will be premium brands that you'll buy. Your dals will be more premium. Your what have you? Your staples will get more premium, etc. Rice, you're beginning to see that. So I feel DTC brands will lead the way in creating a premium food stack, which we will consume. So I'm kind of hopeful of that. So that's one area that I'm beginning to see trends. I think if DTC brands can solve speed of supply, and I think that's one challenge there. A lot of times I wanted to buy stuff, but 6-7 days you go on Amazon and buy Jockey or whatever, So I think if we can solve that, then I think even on apparel and all, we'll start seeing more and more action, kind of. So I don't think things have changed as much as we expect, but there is, I would say, more of the same. Affluent India is spending more. DTC brand proportion has gone up a little bit more, but I don't think there is too much new that's happened. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not such a student of that space, but yeah. So
quick commerce for apparel, I guess, is the untapped market right now.
Thrasio plus quick commerce for apparel.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mensa's new. If I had to
Yeah.
switch gears, Sajid, I remember, reading Karthik's
Yeah.
lovely article. I remember he'd written this about 2 odd years ago where he'd said, exits need to become, mainstream as far
Yeah.
as Indian startups are concerned. Until that doesn't happen, there's no real delivery of IRR, right? And
Yeah.
come 2021, after like a horrible year for a lot of companies, you suddenly see this flurry of like IPOs and mergers and acquisitions. When you reflect on this year, what's excited you about all that's gone down, and what are your predictions for 2022?
Yeah. So clearly, the public reaction and appetite for startup stock really was pleasantly surprising. Zomato, Nykaa clearly leading the way. Some disappointment for Paytm, but broadly, even your Policy Bazaars of the world, Mapma India, insane reaction, right? Like, who would have expected that?
We were just discussing this.
Yeah, we just spoke about that.
Yeah. So I would say what is really pleasantly surprised is that there is the startup stock is emerged as a distinct asset class. And a lot of founders are saying, oh my God, why did we wait so long, for example, right? Not all of them, but some of them are saying. You're also beginning to get, in a reaction to that, not necessarily the highest quality of companies emerging to tap. So when you have booms, you will have folks coming in. So consumers have to be consumers of stock. That is, investors have to be a little bit careful about and they have to distinguish between the really high quality companies. I would put probably Nykaa amongst that, like very well run, like good cash flow, etc. Versus something else where you want to be a little more careful. And I'm not going to take names there, but so I think I'm very pleasantly surprised by the reaction, and I think it's great to have Indian stock market finally have an appetite and have love for high quality Indian startups. But that said, I worry a little bit about 2022. If anything worries me a little bit is we're going to see a lot more kind of come out there, and not all of it will be necessarily of the highest quality. But I hope Indian consumers will be able to kind of distinguish between all of those, stocks, etc. 2022, I feel like to be a little careful. The Fed finally is beginning to understand that all of the money supply kind of which is pumped into is beginning to cause inflation. And I have this joke that all Indian VCs should get up in the morning and do Aarti to the Fed thing. Because the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, that's what is single-handedly. All of us think we are great because of stock. Sure, maybe we are. But fundamentally, it's all of that rising tide, rising money supply that's lifted everything up. And so I think 2022, I think it's sort of like, I joked about it to someone, that the party will continue, but you're sort of realizing that, hey, it is kind of late and the party is going to wind up. We need to be a little more careful about the hangover the next day. So I think those realizations are going to come in 2022.
And I think, obviously companies and brands is one thing, but so much interesting stuff has even happened for you, I'm assuming, as a VC, right? You've had like your Tiger emerge as, SoftBank a la 2018 to, 2019. You've also got all sorts of, new types of syndicates and early stage, seed investors of sorts come up in your earlier rounds. As a VC, and if I had to, sort of switch gears over here, what's your moat? How can VCs and people deploying capital really think about making their business, defensible, especially when money has become a commodity to a significant extent?
Decks.
Yeah.
WhatsApp deck.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So internally, when I joined Bloom, Karthik, who co-founded Bloom, told me that I think everybody thinks VC is about picking the best founders. He told me, no, VC is about getting the best founders to pick you. And for Bloom, for example, we've always been this underdog fund, very scrappy. We're not like an affiliate of a global fund. We've had to raise money. In fact, Karthik and Sanjay out there in US hustling away for money. So we've always had this concept that like the best founders have to pick us and we need to market ourselves to them. So I would say if today, and that's a danger with VC, money is becoming a commodity. If you don't have a reason for the best founders to pick you, and that could be great, like support to them, for example, in helping them hire, or for example, helping them in go-to-market, for example, or something else. Or you don't have a great brand by which you can help them signal that X is invested in you. That's a great signal for the next round, right? So if you don't have any of that, then money is a commodity. And there, I think then you lose to a tiger because tiger is blazingly fast. And it's true, right? 45-minute conversations, and there is a term sheet. All they're saying is just send us your legal name. And if the founder says something, they'll say, okay, yeah, we're willing to go up. How fast can you close? So all that's true. So I think funds, there is a bit of a reckoning coming for funds. VCs have historically coasted because they've been on the buy side. They have a lot more power. But all the power is now going to the founders. The best founders have a lot more power. We're beginning to see fairly aggressive behavior from founders who say that, hey, this is it. Sometimes they come on the meeting and we had this thing where, hey, we've got this offer, would you guys come in? We tell them, oh, it's too fast. They say, well, that's how it is. And so that's great. It's great. But it also kind of does create challenges for VCs. I think the best VCs will focus on what I told you, value add in certain ways, like could be GTM, hiring, or just great counsel, right? Yeah. B, maybe building a great brand so that having you on the cap table is a great signal to the market. Beyond this, I don't know what else could be there. I mean, there could be, but let's pause here. And yeah.
And I had a quick question over there. Obviously, a lot of what's happening right now is you're seeing founders enter into their round 2 of entrepreneurship, right? And I think that obviously has been a large enabler of trust as far as speed of money deployment is concerned. Anything else that you're seeing happening within the founder ecosystem, whether it's in terms of the types of founders coming in, maybe the categories of founders coming in? Because I remember, back when LBV sort of started, you had your IITs, IIMs kind of ruling the roost, right? But lo and behold, you've got 19-year-old dropouts from Stanford raising a shit ton of money, launching Zenko, which never really happened back in the day. So what about founders has fundamentally changed in terms of their profile?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I'd love to talk about the anthropology of founders. And we kind of divide founders into fresh founders and fluent founders today. That's an internal lingo that I can help popularize. But fresh founders are founders starting first time. And fluent founders, now they could be starting for the second time. Typically, they are starting for the second time. So they've had, for example, they built something, it's got an exit, may not have been a great exit, but it's got an exit. They know the rules of the game. Or they could be, for example, good school, etc., working as a CXO or something in one of the unicorns like a Meesho or an Urban Co, etc., who know the rules of the game, who have contacts. Or they could be super bright people out of nowhere, but who've read so much about it, about the industry. So you've got all of these types, and I call them fluent founders. And really what we are seeing is that the fluent founders know how to play the rules of the game, and they're able to kind of market themselves to VCs well, create that FOMO, and quickly get it. At fresh founders, I think the challenge, so there's actually a resetting of price. Fluent founders are able to get, for example, more richly valued kind of deals. And fresh founders probably come a little more cheaply. The other one is actually Web3 founders. And we begin to see, for example, Web3 founders actually say, and it was very funny, someone was telling me that he called this founder and he said, hey, it was a Web3 founder and saying, I'm sitting with a Web2 founder. So he said, what the hell is a Web2 founder? He said, no. So all the Web3 founders, actually some of them are in Dubai and they're all saying, you just have to move to Dubai, or some of them are in Singapore, etc. So the best Web3 founders are quitting India because they're just worried about what's going to happen. I don't think they should worry so much. But the sad thing is that, and it's interesting, a lot of the Web3 founders are not like IIT and BITS pedigree. Some of them are. There's a lot more school diversity there, and a lot of them are from less known schools, which I think is
that's lovely.
Absolutely interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So you have all of these types, and I think India is particularly fascinating now. And of course, student entrepreneurs as well. So yeah, I should pause here.
I love how Web3 founders are like a bucket of their own.
Yeah.
Cool
I'm
kids.
actually want to give another category of founders, because I remember seeing a tweet of yours, I think it was back in June, July, when you put something out about talking to creators and podcasters and everybody else. And I'm like, the creator as a founder or founders as creators seems to be a new category as well, because people are building media for themselves and building reach over there and kind of build that aura around themselves and then eventually whatever they build out. Are we seeing that part kind of going?
No, this is a great point. Founders, for example, you're going to see more of that. I think especially in consumer tech, if you're a founder, for example, who has 20, 30,000 followers, typically on Twitter, but even let's say Instagram, if you have 20, 30,000 followers, etc. I think just incredibly easy to, not easy, much easier to kind of create distribution early on. I mean, where was I reading this about there being like some kind of a creator? Now I forget this thing. So Red Bull reached out to him, and I was reading this in Mario Gabriel's kind of article. Red Bull reached out to him, and he said like, why would I help you build your brand? And he created something called Annie Cola or something like that. I forgot. But it's exactly the thing. If you are a creator, if you have 30, 40,000 followers, it's much easier today to get that initial traction, build that brand, etc. So I'm not surprised by creators becoming founders or founders building their own brands, kind of make it easy for themselves. And we're beginning to see that now. So there's this guy called Rahul, if I forget the name, but the Bima Pay insurance, and he kind of built a very interesting brand around, then there are, for example, founders on the crypto side, etc., building this. So I find this particularly fascinating. You're right that creators who have followers find it a lot more easier to build brands. Yeah.
We also see a lot of founders promoting their tweets, which I find absurd. I don't know if you
Which is the only thing I'm like, don't do that. One do not do that. We can see that it's promoted.
That's fun. I haven't seen this, but yeah, that's very funny. Yeah.
So I'll send you a screenshot next time. Finally, last question for you, Sajid. This year has been so wild because, when I reflect on April, May, June, at least for me, and just the world's worst months, right? You saw a loss at no level, especially if you were in Delhi. All of last year was a bloodbath for small to mid-sized businesses. Retail has suffered greatly, and it seems like a lot of the fruit of the tree has gone to your largely tech, heavily VC funded, and also a certain type of VC funded, kind of startups, right? I want to end with one question, which is, are we in a bubble? And if we are in a bubble, when will this bubble burst? What are the signals we should all be looking at as far as this is concerned?
Well, I don't think it's a bubble that's going to burst very, very fast, but it's a balloon that will deflate slowly. And I think the regulator, what will lead it to deflate is basically the Fed slowly cutting off money supply. I would probably look to that as an indicator. And I would say that as that gets tightened and inflation clearly is a worry. Like look at India's inflation rate, wholesale rate, it's double digits. US, similarly, everybody's talking about it. It's just a matter of time. And as slowly the tap gets shut and reduced, we will start seeing normalization, etc. I don't think it will be a sharp fall because let's face it, with what's happening in US versus China, there is still a lot of money that has to find its way. And a lot of the pension funds, in fact, they will actually say that, look, as inflation raises up, we can't even give 4%, 5%, 6%. We need more. And they're going to look to venture to kind of cover that gap. So venture is still going to grow. But I would say it's just going to get a little more saner, is what I would say. I don't think the bubble would burst. I hope not. It's going to be a lot more harder work for me. I like the cozy expanse of the bubble. So I probably hope it deflates as slowly as possible. But I think 2022 will still be okay. 2023 is what I worry about. Yeah.
To gentle deflation. Thank you so much, Sajid.
It's a pleasure.
This has been absolutely awesome. And thank you for taking out time to do this, man. I know you don't do this too often, but really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Varun. Thank you, Suchita. This was a pleasure as well. Catch you. Bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Varun, my guest.
That was awesome.
Guest.
So fun.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't Sajid amazing?
You bring amazing guests to this show. It's now the pressure is on me to get interesting guests onto the show.
To get Randeep Allahabadia.
Oh man, poor Ranveer. Please leave him alone. He's on holiday in Goa. Oh no, he's back from Goa. He was on holiday in Goa till today. Yes. When you're recording this.
Listeners, this is how Varun flexes that his friend may not be Vicky Kaushal, but Randeep Allahabadia.
No, I just follow him on Instagram. That's how I know he's in Goa. I know other things. But no, I love Sajid. Right? Like a lot of clarity. I also like the fact that he spoke about, when he said what to watch out for, it's not the shiny objects in front, but it's everything else. And I think that's important, right? We all focus on the shiny objects. But the other stuff is what actually kind of builds scale and builds so much business. I
think the reason why I love talking to him and even listening from him is because the thing to remember is his background is not VC, right? He's pretty new to this world. So he's had to literally learn and absorb everything from scratch. And I think it's that, unbelievable curiosity, which is what makes him interesting. And it comes out in his writing, right? In his writing and in his ability to articulate, you can see that he really makes an effort to understand spaces more deeply, and which is why when he speaks or when he writes, there is a lot of like substance to, tap into. And also the other thing I really like about him is he's very like no bullshit. So he won't paint a rosy picture of everything is hunky-dory. He has this really lovely way of grounding things and grounding conversations. But before I continue singing praises about Mr. Sajid Pai, recommendations for the week, Varun, what are you recommending to our dear listeners?
There's this really fun rap video of the cast of Lord of the Rings. They did with Stephen Colbert about how it's the most awesome trilogy. It is super fun. You'll find it on YouTube or on Instagram, everywhere else. But so much fun. And they're all like literally in hoodies and like everybody's there in different scenes. Was Anna Kendrick in Lord of the Rings? She wasn't, right? They randomly keep shitting on her for some reason. She's in the video. She's like, guys, why are you shitting on me? And it's a lot of fun. So watch that video. Like it's random and it's fun. So that's what I would recommend. Also, guys, early next year my book comes out. Please buy my book. I'm going to keep doing this every episode. My book comes out early.
Buy Varun's book.
Yes. What is your recommendation?
My recommendation is, ladies and gentlemen, 1, Succession. Number 2, the Succession podcast, which is incredible. Kara Swisher hosts Varun's alter ego, hosts the podcast, and she literally brings the most interesting guests. In fact, in the last episode, she brought Jesse Armstrong, who's one of the creators of Succession, and she has this like fantastic conversation with him. It's very, very cool.
I'm so happy about that finale. I just love that finale so much. It is like I'm like team Tom Moomsgan. Either pronounce his last name right, but I've been team Tom from the beginning.
I am getting a t-shirt that says Boo Souls on it. I feel like that single phrase was like, the assumption would be like the single phrase of the season / like show would be, go on.
While you're saying that, there is but there is an Instagram account which a lot of people share from. I think it's called No Context Succession.
Yes. It's on Twitter as well. It's excellent. I'm obsessed.
It is amazing. It's the best thing to follow. It's just like, even if you have no context on the show, it's still fun to follow. But,
so ladies and gents, please watch Succession.
Also, episode 5 of Hawkeye is amazing. And 1 episode to go for Hawkeye to get over. And by the way, biggest like non-recommendation, if you watch Spider-Man, anybody, don't spoil it. I'm in a 4-year-old's class. A music teacher has spoiled Spider-Man for me because he's telling these 4-year-old kids, oh, I saw Spider-Man last night. This was there in it. And I'm like, yo, dude,
I am here.
But thankfully I just like closed my ears quickly, so I didn't hear all of it. But I was like, dude, that's
I'm going to start the next recording with spoilers. That's what I'm going to do. Do you know Mr. Big dies in and just like that?
Yes, the Peloton ad is so fun.
The Peloton ad is amazing. Yes, of course. Ryan Reynolds. My Dwayne Johnson, Ryan Reynolds.
Supposedly Blake Lively also had a part to play in that ad, as in to getting made, because there's a lot of behind the scenes photos and where they both like had a lot of fun jamming on it. I think they're also making this in a fun thing, right? People are interested to see how it happens.
Couple goals, man. Did you see that she basically launched a tonic water which is complementary to aviation gin? It's called
Smart Business.
Yes, making money moves.
But that will then take me deeper into Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia territory,
which we will not get into because it's time to go.
One quick thing. Danny Garcia, Dwayne Johnson's first wife, also runs all his businesses, including everything from his energy drink to Terramana to everything else. She's the chairman of the company that helps manage all of these brands. So I'm like, and his physical trainer is her husband. This is very weird, like family, but also like seem to function really well together. I'm like, that's interesting modern family goals.
Lovely piece of information, which I didn't know I needed and definitely did not need. But thank you for that.
Okay, we will stop now.
As usual. That's it. Tata, bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye. Think fast is over. Think
Toodles,
fast is over. Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle bells. Think fast is over again.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. From Jeff Bezos to Amitabh Bachchan, everyone has tasted failure, but they don't give up. On Probation Se Promotion Tak, Abhinav talks about failure and how to use it as a stepping stone towards your goals. On a show about crypto, Rohan and Jaspreet Bindra, founder of the Tech Whisperer, debate whether blockchain could be considered socialist in nature. On the longest constitution, Priya Mirza sheds light on untouchability in the workplace with the help of Article 17. Witness the liberation of Bangladesh in the season finale of War and Warriors as narrated by Air Vice Marshal Arjun Subramaniam. And on Audiogan, Kedar is joined by writer Himali Kothari. They talk about Project 87. This project focuses on English language plays from India. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Go check out our YouTube channels. We go live on a whole bunch of different things. We have a number of different channels. You can find them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week. Cred, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you for making this possible.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.